As I'm making this video, it's nearing the culmination of spooky season, which results not only in free cavities for kids, but also in the masses getting to enjoy the third entry in the Luigi's Mansion series, coming out on Halloween itself of 2019 on the Nintendo Switch. As the potential 2020 Nintendo Switch game conversation has already started to get underway, I began wondering what franchise would perfectly fit into this slot a year from now. And the conclusion that I came to was Metroid. A little bit later, our friend Wright from LootPots is going to make an appearance to give his expert matter on the opinion. But in any case, in this video, we're going to talk about how a new 2D Metroid would be the perfect 2020 Halloween Switch game. Let's talk about it. The first real question to be answered is whether or not Nintendo would even care about timing a release window with the theme or vibe of a game. Sure, Nintendo is releasing Luigi's Mansion 3 on Halloween, but one release isn't really a trend. Well, before taking a look at Nintendo, we can absolutely say that releasing scary games in October certainly is a trend. Yes, they release year-round, but as of now, out of the 167 games coming to Nintendo Switch in October, and no, you didn't hear wrong, that was 167, which is a lot of games. Out of that 167 games in October, 33 of them are spooky or horror themed. Compare that to September's 122 games, of which 7 were spooky or horror. That's 20% versus 6%, so it's an industry trend for sure. But as for Nintendo, we know that they don't always subscribe to the industry trends. But the fact that Luigi's Mansion is releasing on Halloween itself, which is a Thursday, means that they're at least a little bit committed to stepping outside of their norm to keep it thematic. Some other similar examples would be Super Mario Sunshine and Pikmin 3, which released in August and July respectively, and 1080 Snowboarding, which released in February. So if we can decide to assume Nintendo might be likely to release another spooky or horror game in spooky season of 2020, and we're looking at Metroid here, why then go with a hypothetical, unannounced 2D Metroid and not the game we already know about, Metroid Prime 4? Actually, at this point, I was going to have Rob from Rule of Two Review talk about this topic, but I had this idea pretty late in the game, so it didn't work out on such short notice. But I will take the opportunity to point you in the direction of his channel for more news, ideas, and predictions for Metroid and other gaming stuff as well. And we'll see if we can get him on another video sometime down in the future. But for now, let's keep moving. So why not Metroid Prime 4 for this conversation? Well, the reasons it wouldn't be the answer for this topic is multifaceted, for both timing and theming. The easy reason is the timing. Metroid Prime 4 was, from what we are to understand, somewhere between mostly to absolutely completely scrapped and started from scratch right around the end of 2018 or beginning of 2019. So even with the best case scenario of working off an existing engine, having a story ready and all of that, the ambitious game we want is at least in 2021, if not probably further out. It also seems that even if the trilogy is ready, they're pushing it out until they can perhaps announce both games together. But timing aside, I actually think 2D Metroid would lend itself better to the spooky and horror theme, although it would be less flattering on Metroid Prime 4, not for design reasons, but rather for what this game is supposed to be for Nintendo. Metroid Prime 4, we assume, is meant to be a huge prestige piece, and this means it has to have as wide a reach as possible while being a landmark title. And scary stuff in 3D is much less accessible than when side-scrolling, as it makes you feel as if you're there comparatively. If Metroid Prime 4 is meant to reach the Metroid fans, Zelda fans, Halo fans, and as many other fans as possible, it can't afford to scare too many people off, literally. But before we go into further ideas of how this could be possible in Metroid 5, here's my friend Wright from LootPots here to tell you about what Metroid already does well within this genre.
Thanks, Parker. I agree that Metroid 5 would fit perfectly in the spooky month of October. We love playing games and watching movies that scare us and remind us that we're human, and we especially love doing this around Halloween. Whilst Metroid could never be called a horror franchise, the series is actually filled with tropes that are popular within modern survival horror games, and I'm going to tell you about them. I could probably go on for a while, but this is Parker's video and I'm just a guest, so I'll try and stick to 3 key points. Isolation plays a huge part in what makes Metroid feel like Metroid. Whether you're exploring Zebes, SR-388 or the Ceres space station, Samus, and by extension the player, is almost always put in a situation where they're alone and stranded. Generally, everything is hostile and there's rarely anybody to talk to or assist you. Feeling alone in a world where everything is trying to kill you is survival horror 101, and is arguably as important to the genre as limiting resources. Part of the reason games like Metroid Other M don't feel like Metroid is you're constantly being led and informed, so you rarely get a chance to feel vulnerable. Metroid Fusion offers players an olive branch in its guiding AI, but this is only available at specific points in the world. These may seem like a comfort, but when you're outside of these navigation rooms, there's something else that's constantly on your mind. You know what's scarier than being alone? Not being alone. Metroid Fusion employs a different survival horror trope by introducing players early on to a silent stalker, the SAX. The SAX is essentially a thoughtless, ex-Parasite clone of Samus in her power suit, equipped with all the weapons and abilities she doesn't have anymore. It's rare that Samus comes up against a threat that she's not equipped to deal with, but the SAX is a terrifying mirror of Samus at full power that she faces when she's arguably at her weakest. You never know when you're going to come up against the SAX, and all you can ever do is hide and hope it doesn't catch you. Not being able to prepare or plan for these moments is just as scary as realising there's nothing you can do anyway. As a kid back in 2004, I dreaded every encounter with the SAX, so finding out there was more than one on board of the space station was terrifying. The Invincible Stalker is a trope that's key to games like Alien Isolation, Resident Evil 2 and Outlast, and seeing as Metroid 5 will likely take place after Fusion, the SAX hunting Samus down is a trope that I hope somehow returns. Human beings take comfort in being informed. Fear simply comes from a lack of understanding. What's that under my bed? What went bump in the night? Is that noise a ghost or just the pipes of an old house? Pulling the mask off of a ghost and finding out it was old man Jenkins all along is a relief, and it's why Metroid's lack of guidance that is peeled away as you become more powerful and work out how to overcome more obstacles feels so rewarding. The beginning of most Metroid games can feel almost claustrophobic as you hit dead ends and have no idea where to go. Being lost in these unfamiliar worlds is kind of the whole point. It's not until you start opening doors, improving your arsenal and learning how the areas link together that you start getting an understanding of the world you're in. By the end of most Metroid games, you're a nigh unstoppable badass that can kill enemies with a somersault and leap across giant chasms effortlessly, but you've worked to get there. I've always imagined Metroid 5 as a sequel to Metroid Fusion, where Samus is on the run from the Galactic Federation and a surviving SAX. But really there's so many places they can take the franchise. Hopefully we do end up seeing it next year, but until then, just remember to tell your mum that Parker says hi. Thanks for listening, thanks to Parker for having me, and until next time, goodbye.
Thank you very much, Max. So now that we've established that Metroid already excels in this context, what else could they do to push it even further in the future?
Madness.
This is a mechanic that's heavily played upon in games like Eternal Darkness, but could certainly be borrowed here. Whether or not you can trust what you see really builds not only fear, but also deeper contemplation of the events taking place. Even outside of a horror context, this is done incredibly well in Celeste when, during an early level, you replay a section you just explored, being chased by your nightmare self, only to find that it may have really just been a dream. Samus has been through a lot, so it wouldn't be too surprising if the isolation in which she's thrived for years now is accompanied by PTSD and ultimately some dread, which coincidentally, Metroid Dread was meant to be the name of the sequel to Metroid Fusion.
Loss of power.
This would likely be a moment in the game rather than throughout it. But as Max pointed out to me in this conversation, a common nightmare humans have is one where you're doing normal things, but it turns out you're naked. This is ultimately vulnerability. In more than one Metroid game, Samus starts with all of her equipment, it's taken away, and progression is her retrieving these pieces of equipment. But what if, after becoming reliant on these, there is a moment where you can no longer be? Like with the SAX, a differential in power is what makes enemy encounters challenging or a breeze. The reason the Hinox on Eventide Island in Breath of the Wild is so ominous is that you have much less equipment with which to fight him. So taking it on the first time was a monstrous task, but by endgame, a blue Hinox would go down without much of a fight. And hitting much closer to home for the 2D Metroidvania style is an indie game called Overwhelm. This game is essentially just 5 boss fights and some platforming, and some small enemies to get there. but every time you beat a boss, the remaining ones power up, and you don't. So you have to decide which ones you're most afraid of so you can take them out as soon as you can. This, I think, would be a great addition to a section in the next 2D Metroid to give some good spooks. But the last thing is
Art style.
this will obviously be a huge question, because around its release will surely be the conversation of, will this game be worth full price? Just like it was with Link's Awakening, Tropical Freeze, Mario U Deluxe, and several more. And we'll probably talk about that kind of thing in another video down the road, but for this conversation, I think taking a bit of inspiration from Hollow Knight would actually do a great service. Metroid excels at having varied environments, and some of Hollow Knight's are more subtle, but pure up-res of some older styles may look a bit plasticky for modern Metroid. So a slightly more painterly approach could allow for darker content that doesn't feel oppressively mature. All in all, I think a 2D Metroid is inevitable to come back, and I really hope that when it does, that they push some boundaries with it, as they have a very attentive audience since Metroid's been talked about so much and just so waited upon at this point. To me, Metroid Prime 4 will be the high budget and more accessible, but still very well reviewed game that it needs to be to push Nintendo and Metroid further into the public eye. However, I hope that they do experiment with 2D Metroid in a way that they might not feel comfortable with Metroid Prime. But that's what I think. What do you think? Could we see a 2D Metroid in 2020? When are we going to see Metroid Prime 4? And where in the world is Metroid Prime Trilogy? Let me know all that and more down in the comment section below. Before you go too, we have a giveaway for Pokemon Sword or Pokemon Shield that links in the description below. And then also, whatever comments you write below, we'll pull some of those and talk about them on our podcast directly to you. That happens every Saturday at 4 p.m. The link's in the description to go to that, but also there's a little circle thingy in the end card that you can check out right below my face here in a second. But yeah, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every Thursday and Tuesday. I did that backwards at 4 p.m. Eastern time. That's it for me. See you guys around.